All right, next up is the Americans. The Americans are the first really complete army in mid-war. The Germans and the British are going to be getting an additional book. Armored Fist is going to be right after the Italians, and then the Germans are probably going to get a book when Eastern Front comes out to complete their mid-war. But the first one to really complete it are the Americans. When you open up the book, you can see right away that they have many more options. They get more core units. They do get a good amount of support units, but the amount of core units that they can get, Stuart, Lee, Sherman, tank destroyers, mechanized infantry, regular infantry. Usually you have maybe 2 tanks and an infantry so far, but here you've got tank destroyers and armored in there, and that makes them very versatile. The standout units, of course, are the Sherman. The Sherman has great armor, the best armor for a medium tank. Even an up-armored Panzer III has 6.3 on their armor. Has the best gun. You know, Panzer IV can't even. You know, it is the same thing, but it gets smoke and has stabilizers. So that means when you're shooting, you could shoot both your shots. It's harder to hit. That's all. So the Americans have stabilizer, and they're just amazing. So the Sherman, best medium tank in mid-war so far. M3 Lee, probably the most cost-efficient car, because if you look at the M3 Lee compared to the Grant, you can see that the Grant is 6 points and the Lee is 5 points. So you're 1 point down. And you have it's the same tank. Okay, so you got the same stats as far as the tank is concerned. Of course, you know, confident. The Lees don't have the remount, but they also don't have the last stand, so that's a wash. Their skill is worse, and they get hit easier because they're hit on 3s, whereas the British are hit on 4s. So this is going to be the theme of the Americans, is that they have the best equipment. You know, you got the Sherman. You're going to see they have the best equipment, but the worst troops. Okay, they get hit very easily, and this becomes very apparent when you get the Stuart. The Stuart is hit on a 2, which is just awful. I mean, I thought it was bad when you had the Crusaders hit on a 3-up, and these guys are hit on a 2-up, and that's just ridiculously bad. So these guys are going to get hit a lot, so they're going to need really good equipment, but it's also cheaper. They have the best artillery in the game because their artillery is time on target, which means in this game you range in, the next turn they have to re-roll their saves. Well, Americans, you range in the first time, then they have to re-roll their saves. So you can catch people off guard by ranging in very quickly. Now they're only trained, so they don't range in as easily, but when they do, it's lights out. So that's for the Priest and the 105s. Just amazing artillery as far as bombarding is concerned. Best bombarding artillery in the game, not even close. Then you have the armored rifle. Armored rifle are the only mechanized. They're really good troops. They got bazookas up the wazoo. Very expensive troops, but they're worth it. They're not very good at assaulting, but they're good at holding a position and beating people up, and they rally very easy. That's one thing that they have. But the equipment is top-notch, better than anything. They got the best anti-tank equipment. They've got machine guns up the wazoo. So as long as they're shooting, they're good. And that's another theme about the Americans. The type of person that takes the Americans likes to shoot, not assault. You're not an assault army. With your green, rolling 5-ups to hit on assault, that's really, really bad. You're going to lose a lot of assaults because of that. But because your stats really don't matter when you're shooting at somebody, it's how well you hit them, and the Americans hit the hardest. So if you like to sit, just maneuver and shoot and not go in and they're like the opposite of the British. The British like to get in your face and punch you in the face, whereas these guys like to just dart around and shoot, which is emblematic of having all these stabilizers on their tanks, where they can move and just throw out a ridiculous amount of shots at your guys. Okay, their planes are the worst in the game so far. The Towns, I'm sure, are going to be worse. but they're green, so they can bomb and they can strafe, which is really, really useful. So they're very versatile planes, but they're not going to be bombing that well, and even if they hit, their bombs are terrible, and they get a lot of shots with their strafing, which is good. You could, potentially pin down units by strafing, unlike the Hurricanes. But the anti-tank and firepower is worse than the Hurricanes. So if you take a look at them versus the Hurricanes, you can see, well, the skill doesn't matter for the Hurricanes, but they get 2 shots, 7 anti-tank, whereas the Americans get 3 shots, 5 anti-tank, 5 up firepower. So clearly the Hurricanes are better, but the Hurricanes are more. They're 9 points, and the Warhawk is 6 points. So you could save a lot of money. Very economical planes. Then finally the coup de grace, the M10s. Oh my gosh, they get Seek, Strike, and Destroy, which makes them like German tanks because they can pop out, shoot, blow you up, and then shoot and scoot and get behind something so you can't even hit them. They got 36-inch range, 12 anti-tank. I mean, these things can take out Tigers. So, and they still have a decent front armor. So their weakness is maybe artillery and planes. Stukas are going to have an easy time with them. But other than that, these things are pretty amazing. So that's the big unit there for the Americans. You get into the command cards, and what they focus on, of course, since they have the worst troops, is that you can pay for regular troops. Instead of having, bottom tier troops, you can get them to mid-tier troops by buying these cards here to make everything but the Shermans pretty much regular troops, so that they're confident, trained, careful. It makes them very difficult to hit. So they're not quite elite, but it makes them much better than the cruddy troops. You also can get a unit of Rangers, which I think are amazing. They're fearless, and even though they're green, they have a deadly assault. So these are your assaulters. If you like to assault, you're a shooty kind of person, you like the Americans, but you want to have one of these guys hanging around to assault if you need it, here they are. And then the 2 units that get added here, you get a recon company, which seems to be standard. Everybody gets a recon formation to go there, and then the Americans get an engineer combat company, which is a really good thing to have engineers, which is pretty important. They're not as good as they used to be with anti-tank, not yet anyway, but they're good at clearing minefields, which is going to be bigger this version, and they're good at digging in. And they've got a bunch of leaders that are, I guess, for flavor. But the big card here, the big standout, is favorable position. You take your M10s, you give them favorable position, and now they're exactly like Germans, where they can shoot and scoot on a 3-up, except they'll be 4-up on the Blitz. Only difference. But the shoot and scoot is a real important part. You got to be able to get these guys out of the way, and so this does that. So that's the Americans. They are best equipment, worst troops, shooty army, not assaulting. That's the style. If that's your style of play, go with the Americans.